We spoke with the executive director of the Macon Area Habitat for Humanity, Herold Tessendorf. You may not know this, but he was born and raised in South Africa. He says growing up, there was a lot of uncertainty about the future. He called it an unstable South Africa at the time, in the middle of a civil war and not looked upon favorably by the rest of the world. And in his home country, Mandela was shunned. Tessendorf came across the leader's work during his university years while reading a piece of banned writing material Mandela contributed to called the Freedom Charter.
And the opening line that always stayed with me was, "South Africa belongs to all who live here, black and white." And when I read that as a student for the first time, this was a banned document, but of course students get everything. It's jumped out at me as saying, well, maybe there's something worthwhile going on here, you know. And again, that was a time when it was in the waning years of apartheid, but in the late 1980s there was also tremendous violence going on in South Africa, and so that was very much the context. And then again, in the back of the mind was this man Mandela. I remember listening to the whites only, the last white elected president, F.W. de Klerk, going in front of Parliament. Nobody expected him to say, "I'm unbanning the ANC, I'm releasing Nelson Mandela, and we're going to start talking about how we're going to get through this." And all of a sudden things started to really move forward. At that stage in my own career, being at a university, being involved as advising and helping to start a conflict resolution institute with some of my professors, really the question then became, well, okay, how are people going to be talking? So, and that became a lot of my life between then and 1994.
And how were people talking? How were they responding to Nelson Mandela at that point then?
I think, first of all, certainly amongst Nelson Mandela's supporters, the majority of South Africans, I think there were very, very high expectations. I mean, looking back in hindsight, Mandela really had to walk a tightrope, because on the one hand, if he made concessions too quickly, he would have lost the support of his political base. But on the other hand, he also had to work with his base and towards that goal of not only ending apartheid, but actually creating this non-racial democratic society.
And how do you think he did with it?
I think that a couple of things struck to mind. Number one is Nelson Mandela was a very wise man, a very humble man. And I think one of the lessons I took away from working with some of the people that were imprisoned with him during that peace accord time in South Africa was the fact that you go for the moral high ground, you treat everybody equally, and you model how you want people to treat you. And that was a legacy of Nelson Mandela's at an interpersonal level. But then he brought a lot of statesmanship to that. And I think in that way, whether you agreed with Nelson Mandela or not, he had the ability to move people to be great.
Speaking of the legacy of Nelson Mandela, as a South African yourself, is it different? Do you find that maybe the universal view of who this man was is different from your own personal view or other South Africans' views?
I think that there's many things, probably more things about that people don't understand. I mean, I think there's a general acceptance that this was a great statesman on the part of people across the world. Now, that doesn't mean that Mandela, I mean, he had a lot of issues to deal with, and he didn't deal with all of the issues in South Africa. You know, he didn't necessarily deal with the huge economic impact, imbalances along racial lines and that sort of thing. But I think his legacy is the fact that in the case of South Africa, he created the breathing space for this democracy to come forward.
And I got a chance to talk with Tessendorf for quite a while, and in our conversation he brought up the Clint Eastwood movie Invictus, and that depicts how Mandela helped unite South Africa through the sport of rugby. It was funny, Tessendorf says it was a perfect portrayal of Mandela's work. And shortly after his passing, Senator Johnny Isakson expressed his condolences, saying the world lost a selfless champion of freedom, democracy, and equality today. Nelson Mandela's courage in the face of terrible injustice helped dismantle apartheid, and his determined leadership guided South Africa through a process of reconciliation that at one time seemed impossible. Mandela's legacy will be one of dignity, forgiveness, and a profound dedication to the principles that all free people hold dear. My thoughts and prayers are with his family and the people of South Africa.